This is the Unrationed Podcast. My name is Evan Chasteen.
I'm Tony Albrecht.
I'm Josh Aranda.
And we begin this podcast each time with sharing our wild moment from the week. A wild moment is what, Josh?
Just something from the week that helps us remember our path. I was not prepared to share this. You put me on the spot.
I know.
But,
well, I was going to
just
explain it, and I felt on the spot myself. I was like, we probably should have some language around what a wild moment is defined.
I feel like we tease all these things out. But yeah, just something from the week that stands out that helps us remember our path that we're on, choosing to go past thresholds and return home. So yeah, just anything from the week that stands out that hopefully is somewhat in nature or in the wilderness, but not
physically
always.
or metaphorically. I think is worth noting. Anytime we say wild, there's like this metaphorical wilderness we're referring to that a lot of the time is actually representative of a wilderness too.
Yeah.
All right, Tony,
those are wild moments
for sure. Tony, what was your wild moment from the week?
Well, after listening to you gentlemen so elegantly bumble your way through that, thank you.
Yeah.
I've had a really hard time coming up with one for this week, which I'm not proud of. But we did get out swimming last weekend. We got out for a beach day, and just so the 3-year-old Wilder has been taking some swim lessons this summer, and he's gotten over the hump where he's really comfortable in the water, and he's gone from wanting to hold on to somebody to wanting to be close to somebody to now just running in the water, wanting to be there for 4 hours without coming out. And if you don't watch it, he just turns out toward the lake and just starts going. Yeah, it's so much fun to watch. Just, but it is one of those things that's. All right, there are a lot of things that are metaphorical in there about learning new skills, and then as a child, having those anxieties or fears around water, around what you can't see out there, or not knowing what you're doing in there, and then to get that level of comfort and through that curiosity and through that intention and that practice, then having that whole new avenue for exploration open up in a way that you go, oh, I want to go over there. It's really fun to watch. Josh, how about you?
Yeah, so my sister and her family were in town this past weekend, and my parents were in town. So we all went out to the Great Sand Dunes National Park in Colorado, which was really, really special. So we all went to this BLM, Bureau of Land Management land, and we were able to do dispersed camping, which it was like my sister's family's first time, and I think my parents' first time doing dispersed camping. So we're just like in this awesome field right at the base of Blanca, which is a 14,000 foot peak in Colorado, and just like super awesome sunsets. My kids were playing in the dirt the whole weekend, which was awesome. But I feel like the thing that was like really the wild moment. So my brother-in-law was up early on, I guess, Sunday, and he was like getting the campfire started. And he said he saw something like out in this like big pasture, like behind this like barbed wire fence, just kind of like walking to him, like way far out in the distance. He's like, what is that? He's like, is that an animal? Like there was a bunch of cows out there earlier, but it was weird. He only saw like one moving thing. So he grabbed these binoculars and he looked out. He's like, holy crap, this is a human. And so this person's just like walking towards him, like real slowly, and just kind of like hobbling around. And he gets to the barbed wire fence and like climbs through. And my brother-in-law is like, hey, everything all right? Like, what's going on? And this guy, he goes, he's like, I'm a missing person. And he just started crying. And he was climbing, there's these 14,000-foot peaks right there that you can link up. And he was on the last 14,000-foot peak called Little Bear, and just got caught into this gnarly weather. And anyways, he had left at like 1:15 a.m. the day before. He hadn't slept the night before, got caught in this bad weather system. And he said he was like wading through the forest trying to find his way. He had to bail on a not necessarily a defined route on Little Bear. And anyways, he said he saw like eyes in the trees and everything. And I don't know if he heard other noises, but he slept in a tree the whole night and then bailed. And he had no idea where he was at. His phone died. His last text message was, I'm lost, call 911 to a friend. And then his phone died. And so, anyways, this dude was supposed to be done at like 6 p.m. the night before, and here it is at 6 o'clock in the morning. Anyways, it was like, it was cool because he like sat at the campfire with us. You know, we got him coffee, he had breakfast with us. But you could tell this dude just needed human interaction, and it was a really scary moment for him. And yeah, so that wild moment was just a reminder of you never know what night people had. So be kind. But then the other thing too is just like when you're out in the wilderness, like you got to be prepared for a lot of things. And I think that's true with life too. So I've been thinking about my interaction with Kendrick quite a bit the last few days. So yeah, he's a very kind human being, and I'm very glad to have met him. And it sounded like his family was not happy with him the next morning, but they were very grateful to hear from him.
That's intense.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, I'll be thinking about that throughout the day today. There's a lot. There are a lot of metaphors there too.
Yeah. Oh, you're not kidding, man. You're not kidding.
So typically when I think of wild moment, I think of, for whatever reason, I like look back at my week and I think of like ask myself, what was my most primal way of being? And that tends to be a wild moment. So last night, my wife and I went out on a date, and before we left, we put the chickens in the run. Typically they're free ranging, and 3 of them were they had like hopped the fence and were running through the woods on the property that's our neighbor's property. We're like, oh, we'll just get them whenever we get back tonight. They get very scared when the sun goes down and like just want to be perched up safe, not moving around. So we get back and we're like, all right, I'm gonna go get the chickens. So I go out there to get the chickens, and 2 of them are up on the fence and one's down below, and they did not want to get down to go in the coop. They were like very stubborn. So I like I don't like birds. I don't know if I've told this. Okay, yeah. So I don't like birds. So I didn't want to pick up the chicken with my hands, which I'm getting there. I'm working on it. But I've got a stick, so I'm like pushing it off. And my dog comes up and freaking jumps up and grabs the chicken and pulls it down to the ground and starts dragging it. And the chicken is okay, I should say that. But then the chicken ran off in the woods, and my wife and I spent 20 minutes looking for it and finding it and then getting it in the coop last night. And it felt very wild because it was dark. We had a headlamp and a flashlight, and that chicken just settled down somewhere and did not want to be found. And we found it.
That's quite traumatic for the chicken.
Yes, I think it was a traumatic experience for the chicken. We're probably not getting an egg from that chicken today. Gotta settle back into a rhythm.
Wait, when did your dog let the chicken go, or like
right, like pretty quick. I was there yelling at the dog, and she listens pretty good, but still got a hold of it and pulled it down. And There are feathers in the yard. Yeah.
I'm glad everyone's okay.
Yes. Yeah. Chickens are good. Dog's good. It was a wild time. I'm not sure if there's any metaphors in there. But anyways, that was a wild moment. So let's move on. Tony, what's our topic today for the podcast?
Our topic today is going to be around man children. And that's like man hyphen children.
How would you define that?
Well, that's certainly part of our fun. That I would define it as a full grown adult who's operating with the mental and emotional capacity of a child. How about that? I need to sharpen that language, but that's basically it. And
yeah.
Is that we've been, well, Evan, you're working through King, Warrior, Magician, Lover, right?
I am.
Okay. So we've started through this book, and this one is, I was telling Evan, is blowing my mind. I'm loving this one. It's resonating so much with me. And it does speak directly to what we're doing here with Wilds in the Woods, where our goal here is really for ourselves to become better, fuller, let's say, quote unquote, wilder versions of ourselves, so that we can be better husbands, better fathers, better teammates. And the shared language that we're using is this sense that there's something missing in our societal context, something in terms of a rite of passage or an initiation from being a boy to being a man. Some failure in our collective unconscious about how we help our young people. And this goes for male, female, across the spectrum, how they grow and actually make it to adulthood. And so we're all now adults, we're men in our 30s with families. And so now it's not just a matter of trying to figure out how we're maturing, or in the book's terms, practicing, embodying mature masculinity. We're also now thinking about how we help our children grow as, from where they're at now, where all our kids are little, to hopefully being adults. And I know for me, there's this challenge of, so I've got a son who's about to turn 4. I've got a daughter who's 18 months old. How do I help them avoid a lot of the pitfalls I ran into, where the way I see it, my 20s were spent as being an emotional man child. And I do, and to whatever degree I've achieved mature masculinity, and I'm not sure I have achieved it, but I'm much closer than I was 12 years ago. Is what we're doing here is the process from the one to the other. How do you go from that, kind of what they call in that book, boy psychology, to a man psychology? And so that's kind of the overarching framework for how we're thinking about a lot of this stuff. And I was thinking we could focus today on that man-child aspect of it, kind of that starting point. And for me, I write about this in public regularly. I'm pretty comfortable with my story, but as I was thinking about this episode, I was wondering whether that language and that boy psychology idea resonates with you, or with you both, like, as much as it does with me, or is it something that you also see in yourselves, that there was a point where you were growing up, or hell, grown more or less, but still felt like, I mean, because I'm not sure that you both have that same kind of sense that I have.
I mean, I can speak for myself. I feel like, yeah, I mean, it definitely resonates. I think my man-child experiences were, high school and college. I feel like I started to like tighten things up. Actually, I have one story that sticks out in my mind that I feel like was a big conversion point, that I like woke up and I was like, wow, that's not a good thing. But I guess
What's that story? That sounds pretty good.
Yeah. Well, it's one of those stories that I don't think I've shared with anybody really. But hey, let's do it.
Well,
This makes me really uncomfortable.
if you don't want to share it with just the two of us, then you don't have to. But if you want to share it with just the two of us, now's a good time to just share it with only the two of us.
And our massive unrationed podcast following.
Are we recording this?
Yes.
Oh, I see. Well, no,
no, it's good. I think it's a really good thing. So, college was certainly like a blast, wild times. It was, it was fun. I made some bad decisions. So, backstory: when I was 16, I got a DUI like 6 months after I started driving, which is crazy to think about. But anyways, like, so I was pretty good with not drinking and driving. Well, I was like 24 or something. So I'm like married. I'm working, all that good stuff. Anyways, I went to a wedding on New Year's Eve night, and my wife, I think at the time, was working nights, so she did not come to the wedding. And I just got after it. I got lit and, was dancing and having a great time. Well, I didn't think beforehand, and I had drove to the wedding, and I didn't want to leave my car downtown, and I drove home. And New Year's night, worst probably time to drive. And I stopped on the highway under an overpass and I slept there. I was tired, tired and drunk. And I slept there for like 30 minutes, and I woke up and I, made it two more passes down the highway. This is really uncomfortable telling the story. I made it to another pass and I slept there again. And then I got to my garage. I finally made it home. And I woke up at like 5 a.m. in my car. Unfortunately, it was off. And I was just like, what did I just do? So anyways, my buddy had texted me like the next day, and he was checking in on me like, hey, how'd you get home last night? And I told him, and basically he's like, what the F is wrong with you, dude? And I don't know. I don't know why. Yeah, I don't know why I did it. But after that, I shouldn't be like proud, like, oh, I haven't drank and drove since then. But I am proud of that, because that was a really bad moment. And so I think that was kind of like a turning point for me. Like, dude, you need to grow up. Like, you know what, have a few drinks here and there and all that good stuff, but that's unacceptable. And I think that's the word that sticks out of my mind, and that like it is unacceptable. And once I got to terms with that, I was able to make a lot better decisions. But like I think about doing that now, and it just like it's repulsive. It truly is repulsive. So that'll be a fun one for my wife to listen to. I don't even know if I've shared that with her. I should probably share that with her before she listens to this. But that's a big moment of shame, actually, in my life. Well, yeah.
Thank you for putting that out there. Yeah, you've never told me that story.
I don't think I've told anybody besides my buddy who checked in on me. So yeah.
Interesting. Obviously my own story involves a number of incidents where I misbehave with booze, some of which involve then operating a motor vehicle. It was a huge piece of my coming to understand my own man-childness. I talk rather openly about the Guamanian jail cell and coming to on Thanksgiving night, and I don't usually tell the full story, which was like, I basically, like, I was on the island of Guam, didn't really know anybody. My parents were visiting actually for Thanksgiving. That's a detail I usually don't put out there.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, I don't put that detail out. And I usually don't tell like what I was doing, which was I had actually gotten drunk in my apartment and then I wanted a hamburger. So I actually got drunk and then I left to go out and find fast food, but it was Thanksgiving, so places were closed. So then I'm like driving around the island trying to find a place before I then go back home, get pulled over essentially in the parking lot of my apartment. And then on the sobriety test, I end up flat on my back looking up into the sky. Which is a fail. That you, just for future reference, if you are not able to stay on your feet during a sobriety test, you will fail the sobriety test. I did learn that one the hard way, so to speak. But for me, I refer to that as my rock bottom, where from that point, that was when I stopped digging. Right. But I was in a pretty good hole. So at that point, I was 27 years old. So I had, and Josh, like you, like my college years were work hard, play hard, and then they just like progressively got. I was playing harder as I went along, and like through law school, it was like by the time we finished law school, I noticed that the people who were up for partying first year in the way that I did, most of them had moved on by the time we were finishing. And they say that our brain development doesn't quite complete until our mid-20s. Right? That like there comes a point where something clicks and then you are in a different state. And it was like by the time I was 27, it's like I feel like everybody else has grown up and I still haven't. So like that, and that wake up call in that jail cell, it led to everything that came after. But the starting point was I got to wrap my head around the booze and how to change my relationship to alcohol. But that sent me down the rabbit hole of once I got into AA and started doing that deal. There's a line about how the alcohol is just a symptom of a deeper malady. And for me, then that led to needing to basically tear down my whole personality and start over. Because I had a man-child personality. It was all just bravado and insecurity. And so I say all that to come back around to a question for you, where I don't get the sense with you that you had the same sort of experience where kind of that night at 24, and that's that's bad. You should definitely take a cab. And that could be a PSA. Look, just spend the $15 on the cab. It'll be fine. It seems like that was a wake-up call for you that changed your behavior in that respect. Did you have more far-reaching ramifications from that? Like, was it an isolated behavior where you were like, whoa, dude, you just need to not do, like, this thing is unacceptable? Or was there more to it? And I have a sense of what the answer to that is, but I'm interested.
Yeah, it's a great question. I don't think it was super deep-seated. But I had to ask myself the question, like, how did I get there? How did I put myself in a state that enabled me to make a decision that was so reckless? And I think a lot of it is like, you know, I have historically easily like succumbed to peer pressure, which in and of itself is like a weird thing to say. Like, I feel comfortable with who I am. So why do I need to ramp it up when other people are ramping it up just so I can, be a part of the group or something? So, I think, all in all, just like trying to analyze that stuff. But, I think it was more of just like, how did I allow the buildup? How can I be so reckless? What does that communicate? What do my actions communicate to everybody else that's in my life? And I think that thought process was like the thing that kind of like unlocked some items for me in that, you know. Yeah. So I don't really have a better explanation other than that. But yeah, it was just a few things that I had to process. But the moment in and of itself was, awakening enough.
Yeah. Well, and so it's an immature thing to do, right? Dude.
Yeah.
Because that decision shows an inability to properly calibrate cost benefit, right? Which is
without
like,
a doubt.
Yeah, there's just in that moment, and this goes for me in so many situations, right? Where I want this, I want to do this. I don't even really think about the consequences. I just want to do what I want to do. And it seems like maturity is to a large degree coming to understand consequences and the how to properly do a cost benefit analysis. But Evan, what say you? What do you got?
Trying to organize a few things that have come to mind in my head and then turn those organized thoughts into words here. So the first thought that comes to mind is this distinction, or something I think worth noting or bringing up, that boy psychology is not bad. It is good and necessary for all of us. And so thinking through the lens of like, I've got to move from this bad place to a good place, I don't think is as helpful as I developed in such a way where my psychology, the way that I view the world, will be harmful to people around me at some point unless something changes. And in both of the stories you shared, it was this, there was an aspect of boy psychology happening, which is I either don't care or I'm unaware of the harm that my actions cause other people. And I think that's like a keystone of boy psychology. It's not even like with intent. Like intent doesn't matter at that point. It's like you're harming people whether you intend to or not with boy psychology.
Yeah.
And we need to be aware of that. So it's this movement from boy psychology to man psychology that I think we're talking about, and both of those stories do seem to be movements. They're not single moments where like your psychology completely changed, but they were developments. And there was a cycle of orientation, disorientation, and reorientation involved. And so I think in everything we do, I try to find these patterns in everything we talk about. I try to find that pattern specifically. Is like, where is the orientation, disorientation, reorientation? And I think one of the ways we can go from we can enter into this movement intentionally is to become aware of our cycles and get some reps in of orientation, disorientation, reorientation. And that reorientation piece, I think, is key here. It's the coming back home. It's the not staying in the disorientation. And I think boy psychology is the mindset of I'm going to hold disorientation just at arm's length and never actually enter into it, which is impossible. But it's the belief that I actually have the power to keep myself from ever entering into disorientation, which is a lie we tell ourselves with boy psychology. I think it's worth noting that we all still do this. Like we're not at some place where we just never do these things anymore. This is very much a part of my life and my development and my movement from boy psychology to man psychology. So we get these reps in, we become aware of disorientation. Man psychology is choosing to enter into disorientation. Boy psychology is avoiding disorientation or attempting to avoiding disorientation by lying to ourselves and telling ourselves we had the power to not do so. And then the reorientation, I think a lot of us in our stories, if we're thinking through like an archetype of a man child, would actually be somebody who's stuck in a disorientation loop and never able to reorient. And it's just a disorientation after disorientation after disorientation, and there's chaos. That person is chaos. Everything that they are doing, they are Tony, on the podcast, whenever I say things that make you think, I immediately doubt myself. And I need to just tell myself that you're just thinking about what I'm saying. You're not disagreeing with me, but you have this face that whenever you're thinking, it's like, oh crap, I said something. Tony has a rebuttal.
No, that is really good. In that, where my mind went with that was, well, I guess maybe the point was, you said you get stuck in a loop. As that was very much the case for me, where I was an agent of chaos in my 20s. And what you said about wanting to stay in the state of orientation and not get disoriented in the first place was very true. What that led to was disorientation happening through chaotic means. But then there was no reorientation. It wasn't like the full loop that we talk about here, right? It was like returning, trying to turn around and go back where I came from, just like grasping back, because I didn't mean to get disoriented, right? I only got disoriented because I'm an idiot, right? I didn't mean to. I want to stay oriented and in control and on the safe and narrow track that was laid out for me the whole time. Right. So that's where my mind was going. That's really good stuff.
Yeah.
And reorientation doesn't mean going back to the way you were oriented before. A reorientation is a new way of being. That's a great image picture. Image picture. Josh, what were you going to say?
I think the other thing that you said that stands out was that, like, you don't just get to a new state of reorientation. Like, there's still that lingering effects of still, that man-child behavior, if you will, where another story that so I had this one is not nearly as bad, thank goodness.
This is the time Josh killed a guy.
Gosh.
So I had my leadership team for work out in Colorado, and I thought it'd be cool to rent some like ATVs and just like putz around for a bit. So
I
anyways,
heard this one.
I know, this is why I feel more comfortable sharing this story. Anyways, it's known, it's in the universe already. So anyways, me and my two leaders, we were putzing around, and it's a side by side, it's a 4-seater, so 2 people in the front, 2 people in the back. But so I rode in the back a lot, and it was a blast, like seeing both of them drive. And we were doing some going fast. Well, anyways, I got to drive like 3 different times over a 4-hour time period. And, the first time I kind of took it easy. And the second time I kind of cranked it up. I was like, this is really fun. And I was cracking up when I'd like do things, and they were like, my goodness, like slow down, like you're kind of nutty. And anyways, literally the last 10 minutes we have this thing rented, you know, they're like, don't flip us, and like joking around, like in jest and everything. So, I'm going fast up and down. And then we're literally like the last turn. I'm going 2 miles an hour. Last turn that we're getting ready to pull the, 4x or the ATV into the trailer. I thought it'd be funny to like fishtail or something. And so I gun it. And it just so happens that like there's like a rivet, deeper sand, like the situation was perfect. And here it is, just like boom. And of course I tip it on the side that both of them are sitting. So 2 dudes that I like, love, I admire, I feel responsible for, it just like falls, and we're all sitting like on our side, like laying on top of each other. And I'm just like, oh man, I was so mad at myself. I thought about it like the next, how I still think about it. I still, but I'm like, that's man-child crap. You know what I mean? Like, I was the one driving, I was responsible. I had the foreshadowing, I had the warning, I ignored the warning, and I did something reckless. Even though we were going like 2 mile an hour, I had plenty of other behavior before that was more reckless, but nonetheless, it ended itself in a situation where 2 people were in danger. So I like thought about their kids and their wives, just like, oh my gosh, you're an idiot. So, that happened 6 months ago or 3 months ago. So it is this constant challenging of, okay, where are still those behaviors that, are lingering in my, day-to-day living that I still need to squash or, temper, because they're gonna be there, it's just, how do we deal with them in those different moments? But, anyways.
I would be so curious to ask a behavioral psychologist if there are other ways to think through or to identify the distinctions between boy psychology and man psychology, whatever. And those words, boy psychology, man psychology, are from King, Warrior, Magician, Lover. We're stealing those terms from that book. But I'm curious if there are ways, because everything we're talking about is very behavior oriented at this point. And my guess would be there are other ways to identify in ourselves. I also think that's key. This is only helpful. Maybe not only. This is most helpful if the distinctions and thoughts here are applied to your own development, not the development of others. Now, I think we're thinking through both because we're thinking about how our stories impact other stories. But I've got more thoughts there, but I'm not ready fully to articulate. So I'll shift back to asking a behavioral psychologist if there are other distinctions. Or is behavior like what we pay attention to in ourselves as we go through this? Is there anything about that in 12 steps, Tony?
Well, this goes back to the question I was asking Josh about that one incident, which because for me, what the behaviors then indicated was a disorder between my ears. I mean, it's a mental disorder and frankly, spiritual disorder, like a fundamental misunderstanding of my orientation to the universe. And so I'm not sure how to articulate it, but I think there's certainly something around our beliefs that then inform our behaviors, right? That I don't behave in that way that I describe in that story unless I believe that I'm more important than other people. I believe that I should get what I want when I want it. Is that an answer to that question? Am I on the track you were looking to?
I think so. The idea that beliefs impact our behavior, I think, is it can be profound. That statement in of it, I like how simple and obvious it is, but at the same time, there is a depth to be explored with that statement. That what we believe is important, and we would benefit from taking our beliefs seriously and questioning them and aligning them with the reality, which would be how our beliefs show up in our actions. There's this dance between action and thinking.
You haven't not answered my initial question, Evan.
What was your initial question?
My one from a half hour ago about whether you yourself had this experience of feeling like a man-child.
Yeah, so my disorientation came after was my mom dying, and it was my belief system that I had leading up to that point no longer worked for me, so it was very disorienting, and I didn't choose to enter that disorientation, so it was done to me, and it also wasn't my actions that caused the disorientation. So I do think there are, like in the two stories that you shared, your actions were causing some sort of disorientation. Like the cause and effect was very obvious that it was your doing, your sole responsibility. I believe there are ways that we move from boy psychology. There are catalysts that spur that on, which is why we're doing this podcast and unrationed events in the first place, is to give people an opportunity to choose to enter disorientation, to have a moment like being in a Guamanian jail cell and driving home beyond your limits to drive home. Like those are times when you enter disorientation. I think there are ways to choose that in healthy ways outside of it just being done to you. So anyways, all that to say, there was I've entered into this man-child phase. I mean, it was both physically and emotionally and spiritually. After my mom died, I was 21, so I was literally just becoming a man, and I didn't want to leave my boy psychology behind. Like I was turning back to the way that I was oriented before my mom died. The beliefs that I had before my mom died that just no longer could work for me anymore. They weren't serving me. They weren't true in the sense that a reality did not align with them. And I don't have like a moment where everything hit the fan. But I smoked cigarettes for a little while on the back porch of my apartment right after my mom died. And I mean, smoking cigarettes is a not smart thing to do. But I really actually think about that time with fondness. Not that I was killing myself, but it forced me to sit and do nothing other than smoke a cigarette for 15, 30 minutes at a time. It was very meditative, breathing in, breathing out, but also stupid. And then, I mean, substances were also involved in this, like, what would it be, a 4-year period where it's just like, I didn't have any beliefs to guide my actions at all. Like I kind of had let go of any beliefs. And honestly, meeting grace and having a reason to form beliefs and a reason to become a man again was my reorientation process. So that, I don't know if that answers your question.
No, it does. And you've talked about the experience with your mom dying, and to me that seems like a, simultaneously a natural thing, right? People die, we die, and traumatic, right? For it to happen at a young age like that. But there's also something about it that is jarring now for that to happen in the 21st century. Whereas historically, people's parents were dying at young ages regularly. I mean, that was just a part of life, was that you very well may lose one or both your parents before you make it to adulthood. And I have thought about that as, you know, almost, is it a forcing function for growing up? That part of how I was able to remain so juvenile, you know, in this state of prolonged adolescence as long as I was, how much of that was related to a failure, a detachment from death. In that I can kind of name for you the specific experiences I had with death before the age of like 27, and there's only like 4 or 5 of them, and I can rattle them off for you, because they did make an impression on me, but the impression they made on me was primarily how rare those experiences were. And so I wonder whether that leads to a misunderstanding of the natural cycles of life. One where I'm at today, I am grateful for every day. Is it by now I have, I think, internalized this idea that nothing is guaranteed. Right? It really is not, and so you waste your days at your own peril, because there's no sure thing that you're going to get tomorrow or the 40 years from now that I hope I get. So that it does seem like that was a true initiatory experience for you, right? In a way that like you said, you didn't choose it, you didn't want to do that, but in your frame, what's more disorienting than that, right? Than losing a parent at a young age, and then figuring out how to reorient to the new reality, which you're saying, may take years and involve a lot of lessons. But I'm trying to think. Yeah, go ahead.
There's the whole death piece, I think, is really, it'll come up in a lot of our podcasts, I think, throughout the time that we do this. Yeah. It'll likely be talked about at an unrationed weekend. I do think it's important to explore that. And I've read a lot of stories just online of people who have had near-death experiences. They tend to view that as an initiatory experience. They are different after that experience. Based on my reading of like psychedelic studies, people using MDMA or psilocybin to like heal their traumas, PTSD, or just end of life. There are these therapies being used now, and it tends to revolve around this acceptance of death. Like people go on a journey and encounter something that they've been afraid of or they are afraid of, and then either engage with that thing that they're afraid of or fight the thing that they're afraid of, and based on that, it leads to a good experience, bad experience, and there is this acceptance of what is, or a new way of being that comes on the other side of those. So yeah, I think death will come up, our own death and the death of those that we love and we care for. They're inevitable, those things, and boy psychology would hold thinking about that at a distance, and I think man psychology thinks about it, engages with it.
Yeah.
It seems worth noting in all of this that if this causes any thinking about or remembering these stories, Josh, even you remembered that story and you're like, oh my gosh, this brings up so much shame. There is a point where it's like good to go get help with this. If you're listening to this and you're like, stories are coming to mind that are causing an unsettled feeling, like counseling. I've gone through a lot of counseling, particularly in that 4 years of disorientation. I sought counsel very often, and I think that was really helpful in becoming reoriented in a way that was healthy. And so I 12 steps, Tony, for you in that. And I just think it's important to note that we don't do this on our own.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I remember this guy that I played soccer with in high school. He was a senior when I was a freshman, and he got into a car accident and ended up passing away. And I remember at that point thinking, my gosh, life is short, but it led to recklessness in a boy psychology. Whereas now, my mother-in-law's best friend, who's been super gracious and generous to me and my wife, and like opened their doors multiple times to us, she's got stage 4 pancreatic cancer, and her daughter's wedding's coming up next month. And so now I'm thinking the same thing. Life is short, but instead of let's be reckless, it's, my gosh, I need to soak every ounce out of every single moment and cherish everything. Right. So, and that is a healthy indicator for me, in that, like, I can look at my children, I can look at the sunset, I can look at the mountains and want to suck every life of joy or ounce of joy out of it.
Speaking
my
of
son Jack, I'm gonna hold on.
Right on cue.
Yeah, that's awesome.
That's probably a pretty good place to dismount, right? We've been rolling for a while.
Yeah, this is a great episode. Thanks, Tony, for kicking us off on a man
great
psychology.
Topic.
There's a blog post up. Tony's story is on there that he shared with us today, and just these thoughts of man psychology. A link to King Warrior Magician Lover on wildsinthewoods.com. It's wildsandthewoods.com. Sometimes it sounds like I'm saying in the woods. What were you gonna say, Tony?
Yeah. Could we put it in the show notes? Is it time for us to start using show notes?
Let's do it. Yeah. So there's a blog linked in the show notes, and a link to King Warrior Magician Lover in the show notes. We probably need to get an affiliate link at some time and have that disclaimer too, but it is not an affiliate link. We will not benefit.
We're gonna want that.
And then we're doing this thing called Wild 32 right now. You can learn more about that on the website as well. And then if you want to subscribe to this thing, we wouldn't hate it, but it seems selfish to ask that I'm like, really, I would like to wait until we have 25 episodes and people know that we're going to be doing this for a while, but we're going to be doing this for a while.
Yeah, we are. And this is going to be what, episode 7, 8? I mean, we got the cadence, we got the rhythms, we know what we're talking about in general. We have like another 25 conversations we could readily have about this. It feels good having had a couple podcasts in the past that didn't make it beyond a half dozen episodes. I've been really thrilled to be doing this with you gentlemen and having Avery supporting us to actually get into a rhythm where we are producing these consistently and building up that body of work. I'm pretty sure we're going to be here a year from now doing this.
I agree.
Yeah.
All right. Signing off. Choose disorientation.
Yeah, buddy.